Population growth refers to how the number of individuals in a population increases or decreases with time. This growth is controlled by the rate at which new individuals are added to the population through the process of birth and immigration, and the rate at which individuals leave the population through the process of death and immigration. We referred to populations in which immigration and or immigration occur as open populations. Those in which movement into and out of population does not occur are referred to as closed populations.
There are two basic kinds of life tables, a cohort or dynamic life table and a time-specific life table. A cohort or dynamic life table is an approach used where the fate of a group of individuals born at a given time is followed from birth to death. A time-specific life table is an approach used by sampling the population, obtaining each class's distribution for a single time period. Most life tables are constructed for vertebrate species having overlapping generations so to follow mortality rates. Here is an example of a life table, particularly a cohort life table for the species Phlox drummondii. This table shows the proportion of survival and death of the species considering different age intervals. The mortality rate can also be computed like the one shown in this example, which was considered on a daily basis. There are three areas of plant demography where life tables are used. First is seedling mortality and survival, population dynamics, and life cycles of annual plants. The next topic to be discussed is about life expectancy. For an example, we are to compare the life expectancies of people living in Burundi and Sweden.
Well, today I'm coming to you from the Science Department stockroom, which seems to be the only quiet place in the building. And today we want to take a look at life tables and how they might be used to create survivorship curves. So in this first graphic, we've got a life table for the US population in 2004. And what you'll see is on the left, we've got age intervals. Then we have the number living at the start of the interval. We have the number dying during that interval. And then we have the chance of surviving that interval. And so, if you take a look at this, what you get, 0 to 10 years, 100,000 individuals started, 871 died before the age of 10, which means your chance of living to the age of 10 is 99.1%. If we come down and we look at, say, 40 to 50-year-olds, 96,517 of that original 100,000 started the interval alive at the age of 40. During that time, 2,781 died, which means 97.1% survived. If we come down and look at 80 to 90-year-olds, 53,925 started the interval, 31,706 died during that interval, which means only 41.2% survived the age of 90. And if we look at 90 plus, we find that 22,219 started, everybody died, and your chance of living forever is 0. Now, what do we do with this? Well, life insurance agents, actuarials, will use this to calculate how much they want to charge you for premiums so that they can make sure that they're making a good investment. What do the rest of us, what do biologists do with this? Well, we can use this sort of information to create survivorship curves. And so here are basically 3 rough generalizations for survivorship curves. And what we will see is that organisms generally fall into one of 3 categories, or really somewhere in between perhaps. And what you're looking at is percentage of survivors, so we're looking at a percentage, and down here on the x-axis we're looking at percentage of lifespan, okay, maximum lifespan. We're not looking at actual numbers, so even though a squirrel may only live for 3 years, that may be his max lifespan, and a human may live for 95 years, that's her maximum lifespan. Since we're calculating as a percentage, we can compare them directly. So what do we find? If you look at this, we end up with 3 generalized curves. We get a type 1 survivorship, shown represented by the human. We get a type 2 curve, represented by the squirrel. And we get a type 3 survivorship curve, represented by the oyster, down on the bottom. Now, what characteristics would you expect? If you look at this, this is the percentage of survivors. So we see that it's very flat for a very long time, meaning most people survive way out to adulthood and beyond, into ripe old age. And then when they get very old, they start to die off very quickly. So you may remember that we had numbers, your chance of surviving to age 10 was 99%, your chance of surviving out to age 60 was about 97%, and then the numbers really start to drop off. That is because of the characteristics of the organism. So if you think of what humans do, we produce few offspring, we give them a lot of care. So most of the offspring are going to survive their childhood. And then when they get very old, they die of old age. Contrast that with sort of the opposite, the type 3, which is our oyster. And so what have you got here? You start off with 100% survivorship at birth, and then very, very rapidly, by say, 25% of maximum lifespan, you're down to say, percent of survivors, you're looking at maybe 0.3% of the individuals that were born are still alive at 25% of the maximum lifespan. So most of the babies that are born are going to die very, very early. If you make it past a certain point, if you look at this, if you make it to half of the maximum lifespan, you've got a pretty good shot of going all the way and making it to the maximum lifespan. So what does that tell us about oysters? Their characteristics and other organisms like them, they produce lots and lots of offspring. It's not uncommon for these organisms to produce thousands of offspring, lay thousands of eggs, and they provide virtually no care, or often absolutely no care, to those offspring. So the parent may just lay the eggs and then leave, and the offspring are on their own, and a tremendous number of them are going to die almost immediately. The few that do survive to, say, half of their maximum lifespan, almost all of them are going to make it to their full lifespan. Where are most organisms? So, type 1, we've got humans, we have other large mammals. Typically, those are your larger organisms. Type 3, we have a lot of invertebrates, we have fish, and that sort of thing. And then in the middle, we get something that's kind of in between, squirrels. They produce fewer numbers of offspring, and they give them some care. So they're not taking care of them quite as much as a human would, but they're providing some care, some parental care for them. And basically what we're looking at, this is a straight line, which pretty much means that there is an equal chance of dying every day. We have an equal chance of dying every day, and this is typical of rodents and organisms like that, small mammals. So we'll come back and take a look at this in a little bit more detail again after we've taken a look at K&R Strategist in a later talk. So thank you very much, and we'll see you later.
Age-specific fertility rate measures the annual number of births to women of a specified age or age group per 1,000 women in that age group. The estimate of birth rate can be improved by taking two important factors into account. First, in a sexually reproducing population, only females within the population give birth. Second, the birth rate of females generally varies with age. Therefore, a better way of expressing birth rate is the number of births per female per age X. A table of age-specific birth rate of gray squirrel population showed that in an increasing age of a reproducing mother, the number of offspring produced decreases. X is the age of females, and BX is the number of offspring produced. At age 0, females produce no young, thus the value of BX is 0. The average number of offspring produced by a female ages 2 and 3 increase to 3, and by reaching the age of 5, females no longer reproduce, therefore BX is 0. The sum of the BX values provides the average number of female offspring born to a female over her lifetime. This is the gross reproductive rate. In the example presented, the gross reproductive rate is 10. This value assumes that a female survives to the maximum of 5 years. What we really need to measure is the net reproductive rate that incorporates the age-specific birth rate as well as the probability of a female surviving to any specific age. From this data, Philippines' lowest fertility rates were recorded on ages 15 to 19, 40 to 44, and 45 to 49, and highest on 25 to 29 and 20 to 24 age. An increasing birth rate on ages 15 to 19 in the year 2000 may be attributed to teenage pregnancy.
Teenage pregnancy is widespread in the Philippines, especially among the poor. In Manila, this contributes to rapid population growth and helps to perpetuate poverty in the city's crowded slums. A new report by UNFPA, the United Nations Population Fund, stresses that a viable urban future depends on providing decent housing, opportunities, and services to the poor. That includes enabling teenagers to postpone parenthood. 130 families, about 700 people, live beneath a bridge in a notoriously poor Tondo district. Locals call them the Bat People. Janice Banag, Age 18, her husband Joel and newborn daughter Janelle occupy a tiny windowless room. They all live on what Joel earns driving a pedicab, about $2 a day. Janice used to counsel other teenagers on how to avoid getting pregnant. Now she speaks from experience. Think before you act, she advises. The Tondo community group Zoto responds to teenage pregnancy by providing health information and services. Every day, dozens of young mothers visit Zoto's health clinic for pre- and postnatal exams. Some, like Janice, give birth at the clinic, and many come for family planning services. Janice doesn't want another child until she and Joel can save some money. She will get an IUD at the clinic.
IUD. So she prefers to use an IUD.
Many other Manila women don't have that option. The mayor has banned contraceptives in public health centers and hospitals. Condoms are not available in government-run health centers, but young people can usually get them at the Zoto clinic. Before she had Janelle, Janice was part of a Zoto performance group. One song they sang contrasted the hard lives of urban squatters to those of people who live in large houses.
Sino pang maaasahan nitong aming abang buhay kung hindi ang manggagawa ng maralitang hanay.
Are the poor any different than the rich? The song asks. Is having a home merely a dream? This is William A. Ryan reporting for UNFPA.
Is mortality so important? Let's just take a look at two numbers. First one is world population in 1900, 1.6 billion. Now watch what happens when we move ahead to 2000, 6.1. Did you notice those two numbers just change places? This, to me, I think, has to be one of the more significant events in human history. It's certainly way up there, when we went from 1.6 billion to 6.1 in just 100 years. And why did that happen? Sometimes people, when they call here at PRB, they ask if the birth rate rose. And the answer really is that the death rate dropped. Let's look at some of the numbers behind this real revolution in mortality, the way death rates came down. Here we see a graph of the United States, Costa Rica, and Sri Lanka. Notice that Sri Lanka's life expectancy at birth, the number of years a baby who's born can be expected to live, was but 41 back in the 1920s, and it was about 31 in Sri Lanka. In the U.S., the same number was about 54, and that had risen from 47 years in 1900. And just look at the end of that graph. In almost no time at all, compared to human history, life expectancy at birth, because of the decrease in death rates, rose to equal, and it's actually almost exceed that of the U.S. So what we see is developing countries, many and certainly not all, who have health conditions that are somewhat similar to the richer countries. One important measure in demography is the crude death rate, or the number of deaths per 1,000 population. If you remember last time, we talked about the crude birth rate, which is, yes, that's right, the number of births per 1,000 population. This is the other side. So if we note here in the Philippines, a country of about 94 million, that in a recent year there were about 450,000 deaths, which works out to about 5 deaths per 1,000 population. Now we can turn to Germany, a country of about 82 million people, and in a recent year there were about 850,000 deaths, or that works out to 10 deaths per 1,000 population. But wait a minute, what's going on here? Germany has a crude death rate of 10 per 1,000 population, and the Philippines only 5. Life expectancy at birth in Germany is 80 years. But life expectancy in the Philippines is 69. How can that happen? Well, it's really pretty simple. There's a much higher proportion of people in Germany, because of a low birth rate, who are in the older ages, say 65 and over, who quite naturally have higher death rates. So, now why are these two rates so useful, the crude birth rate and the crude death rate? Well, when we put them together, what do we get? Well, basically we get population growth, right? Births minus deaths, that's how we come and go. We're forgetting for a moment about migration. We'll just look at births and deaths, which is considered and called by demographers natural increase. So here we look at the Philippines, crude birth rate of 26, crude death rate of 5, and so the growth rate is 21 people per 1,000 population, or 2.1%. That's how we express it usually as a percentage. Now we look at Germany, which has a crude birth rate of about 8 and a crude death rate of 10. So the crude death rate is higher than the crude birth rate. So here we get what is called really natural decrease. There are more deaths every year in Germany than there are births. When a country's in that situation, population growth will decline unless there is immigration. Another thing that this rate of natural increase gives us is just how fast the population is growing and what it might be in the future. In the Philippines, an annual rate of natural increase of 2.1% will double the population in 33 years. So just 33 years, the Philippines population will double. In Germany, a minus 0.2 natural decrease will cause that country to halve in population size, cut in half in about 347 years. That's looking a little far into, but that's what the numbers would say. Oh, hi again. I was just reading this life table from Japan. You know, some people find numbers like this to be, well, you know, sometimes they say they're boring. But, you know, really, a life table, which is kind of at the heart of demography in many ways, really can tell us a lot about a society. So this is a life table of Japan, and Japan happens to have the highest life expectancy at birth in the world. But where does such a thing come from? Well, you know, we often call it the J curve, which is a curve of death rates by age. So here, if we take a look, we can see that in the very youngest ages, on average, mortality is fairly high. As we get into the younger adult ages, it's very low, and as we get older and older, it grows. Depending on this curve, we get a life table. And the life table, it summarizes what we've just seen in this J curve. Let's take a look at Japan. Here we have a life table for Japanese females, and I'm going to do us all a favor and just pull out a few numbers. All life tables start out with 100,000 people. That's that number in the top left. It's a round number, and it's convenient to use. Now, notice in Japan that at age 80, this particular column, called little lx, x just meaning the ages, sometimes it's called the birthday column. So that's what makes it kind of fun. Because you notice that at age 80, out of 100,000 females born, 78,000 are still alive. Imagine 78% of people living to age 80, but not everywhere. Here we look at a life table for a high mortality country, not any specific, just a typical life table. In this one, the life expectancy at birth is only about 44 years, and there are any number of countries in the world who have that low life expectancy. In Japan, it had been 86. Notice the percentage of people who survive until they're 80 in this country, 27%. 27,940 out of 100,000. So this paints a very real picture of what a society is like in many ways, in terms of health care, in terms of the prevalence of immunization, and how long people can expect to live. And again, it was the transition from this high mortality life table to the very low mortality that caused the population growth that we looked at in the very beginning, from 1.6 billion to 6.1. So life tables can actually be fun and interesting to read. Try it sometime. So there you have it. Birth rates and death rates. Birth rates in the last session and death rates now. And that really describes, much of how we live, how we come into the world, how we leave it. And in many ways, that shows us that demography truly is destiny.
This can influence population dynamics. Population growth is a deterministic process because birth and death rates are constant, thus will predict only one exact outcome. Probabilistic or stochastic model of population growth allow the rates of birth and death to vary about the mean estimate represented by the values of p of x and s of x. There are two main types of stochastic models, namely demographic stochasticity and environmental stochasticity. Demographic stochasticity is a stochastic or random variations in birth and death rates occurring in populations from year to year. It causes the populations to deviate from the predictions of population growth based on the deterministic models. The environmental stochasticity model is random variation in the environment that can directly influence birth and death rates within the population. Although survival and mortality is expressed as a probability, it is a discrete event for any individual, for they will either survive or not.
Small populations can be susceptible to a variety of factors that directly influence the rates of survival and birth. Small populations are more susceptible to both demographic and environmental stochasticity. If only a few individuals make up a population, the fate of the individual can be crucial to the survival of the population. Species like the large cats are widely dispersed. They are often seen in packs, or in the case of male cheetah with their litter mates. Female cheetahs are not sociable in that they are often seen alone. Cheetahs in particular are mostly solitary animals, with the exception that some males may live in small groups after their mothers abandon them. The female cheetahs are the ones to choose who will mate with them, and these males won't remain after mating. The pregnancy period will last 3 months, and an average of 3 to 4 cubs are to be born. Being born in the wild, the mother cheetah needs to hunt for food in order to feed her and the cubs. It was during this time that these cubs are to be hunted. In order to ensure the survival of the cubs, the mother cheetah would constantly need to change locations to avoid the prey. The mother cheetah would only leave her cubs once they are ready to hunt for food themselves. In other cases, small population sizes may result in the breaking down of social structure in species that practice facilitation or cooperative behaviors relating to mating, foraging, and defense. Male leks, for an instance, aggregate into groups on a communal courtship grounds, which are particularly susceptible to disruptions of mating behavior and reproduction with declining population size.